Hello, hi, and a warm welcome. This is going to be chapter 3 of my big chapter on the historical Jesus or lack thereof. So we began talking about the mentions there of other people, other messianic pretenders in the first century, and we saw that there were quite a lot of them, many of them very much not as bigger figures as Jesus Christ, at least the way the Bible, at least the New Testament tells it. So we're going to continue now, and I was thinking about doing a supplemental with these two individuals here, but we have an argument that goes around a lot in Christian circles saying, well, we have no evidence for Julius Caesar, we have no evidence for Socrates, we have no evidence for Alexander the Great, and this is simply untrue. This is a weird set of remarks that's made by Christians that's not at all accurate. And remember, I just wanted to say as well, I am actually a Christian. I'm just a Gnostic Christian. I don't believe historical evidence for an historical Jesus exists, but I believe that Jesus of the epistles is far more concrete. The word logos being an intelligent thing from the beginning of creation that helps to order and organize reality for us, and that exists to a point within us. That's what I believe in, just to be very clear here. So we're going to continue today, and we're going to talk about Socrates and Alexander the Great. What I'm going to do is do Socrates today, Alexander the Great at some point very soon. So let's continue. The refutations of the Christians. Oh, I'm going to put as well that you've seen there John's quote. I want you to think about this as well, because the New Testament says that Jesus was obviously extremely important and everyone was talking about him. Not true. Well, it's not true in the historical record. Anyway, the refutations of the Christians against the Gnostics reveal that the Christian God-man was an insult to the Gnostics, who held that their God could never take human form. Father St. Chrysostom remarks the Docetae, as their name denoted, considered that our blessed Lord did not actually exist on earth, nor or suffer upon the cross, but that all was a phantasm. The brief mentions of Jesus in the writings of Josephus, Tacitus, and Suetonius have been generally regarded as not genuine and as Christian interpolations. In Jewish writings, there is no report about Jesus that has historical value. Some scholars have even gone so far as to uphold that the entire Jesus story is a myth. This is the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia. And we're going to cover the Jewish mentions of Jesus or Jesuses, and we're going to see that they're not actually about our biblical Jesus at all. I'm just going to quote one more thing here. As historical documents, these books are hardly worth any credit, or worthy, of credit. That's the New Testament. The Arabian Nights is almost as worthy of credit as the four Gospels. In both are to be found accounts of things possible and of things impossible. To believe the impossible is gross superstition. To believe the possible simply because it is possible is blind credulity. These books are adduced as the credentials of Christ. A critical analysis of these credentials reveals hundreds of errors, if it can be shown that they contain errors. However trivial some of them may appear, this refutes the claim of inerrancy and divinity. If it can be shown that they abound with errors, this destroys their credibility, as historical documents destroy the credibility of the four Gospels, and you destroy all proofs of Christ's divinity, all proofs of his existence. This is a book written over 100 years ago, one of the trailblazing books that helped to establish this in the popular psyche, that Christ may not exist. John Remsburg here, the Christ. An argument still rages about exactly what the first books of the New Testament came onto the stage, or when, the first book came onto the stage. Paul's epistles have been commonly touted as the first New Testament literature, and we broadly agree with the consensus, but there's still room for some debate. These letters were sent to early Christian communities, purportedly written down 20 years or so after the death of Christ. An interesting facet of these letters is that they contain no detail whatsoever of Christ's earthly ministry, and this has confused many scholars. We believe we know precisely why, though, and this is because Paul's Christ did not come in earthly form at all. The other Gospels, at the very earliest, according to common consensus, were crafted around 70 AD, after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple that brought to a bloody close the Jewish wars against Rome under Titus Flavius Vespasian, whose son, also named Titus Flavius Vespasian, was the commander during that war. Mark is commonly argued to have been the first of the synoptics. The other Gospels were written decades after. Matthew and Luke copy substantially from Mark, even verbatim in some instances. And we're going to get on to Socrates, by the way. An argument commonly leveled by Christian apologists is that many historical figures, indeed household names today, have no extant archaeological evidence regarding their having lived in a strict sense. This can be the case as time and the ravages of nature tend to eat up archaeological artifacts, papyrus, which becomes brittle and eventually disintegrates, and paper, so copies of relevant writings need stringent maintenance. With few exceptions, the vast majority of Christian writings come to us via the Middle Ages, so strict maintenance and, of course, copying. The more copies of a work you have, the more likely it's going to come down to us and be copied again and again. You get the picture. This line of reasoning suggests nothing much is ever maintained. It is, however, spurious when charting the birth of big religions. Important historical figures such as Caesar and kings or philosophical movements and their progenitors. These should be addressed in some detail, as many different types of evidence, accounts of physical artifacts, coinage, and references from other important figures indeed do exist to challenge advocates of this tenuous mode of reasoning. So there are multiple lines of evidences for all manner of people from the historical record, especially big people, important people who feed 5,000 and die and then rise again, all the rest. You definitely get that in the historical record if it had happened. Are you with me? Within the first 250 years of the Common Era, the Christian faith had certainly got its boots on, and the intricate apparatus capable of documenting and preserving correspondences, stories, relics, etc., was well established, and we do have examples of myriad of preserved works, often from pagan Romans and Greeks and such. Christian thinkers chose to conserve right down to today. So Christians preserved the pagan literature. And this is, a lot of Christians wanted to get rid of this literature, but of course we have it today largely because Christians preserved them, and obviously other cultures as well. But make no mistake, Christians held a lot of that pagan stuff right through to today. There is a difference, however, between the preservation of various materials belonging to pre-Christian figures and those of the earliest Christian histories. Two of the examples Christians often cite are hugely influential historical figures who supposedly left no trace, and they are Alexander the Great and Socrates. The author himself has been confronted by Christians that use this trick, trying to argue these historical titans have left no evidence in the record of their existence. Therefore, it's perfectly reasonable that Jesus would have nothing contemporary or near contemporary also. No, that's their line of reasoning. This is indeed a bogus assertion. If Jesus had indeed done a fraction of the deeds attested in the Gospels, Eusebius himself writes, because of his power to work miracles, the divinity of our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ became in every land a subject of excited talk and attracted a vast number of people in foreign lands, very remote from Judea. Now this is somewhat true, but the Jesus they're talking about is not the Jesus, the historical Jesus. The earliest churches were Gnostic. Anyway, would this statement not portend a great deal more evidence affirming Jesus' existence? John, writing in his gospel, states many great things were done by Jesus and hundreds of witnesses saw him do them. We read in 1 Corinthians 15:47, just going back to Paul for a moment, Paul gives a list of people to whom the risen Jesus appeared. And what 1 Corinthians right here, and that he was buried and that he rose again the third day according to the scriptures, hint, hint, and that he was seen by Cephas, and then by the 12, and after that he was seen by over 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain to the present, but some have fallen asleep. After that he was seen by James, and then by the apostles. That's interesting, isn't it? So 500 people, no one bothered to. Anyway, here you'll see the resurrected Jesus was observed according to the Bible by the apostle Peter, James, and more to the point by a group of 100 people, 500 people. Unfortunately, no one wrote anything down or said enough fast that anybody around these 500 left any reverberations in the historical record other than Paul. Incidentally, this contradicts the gospel accounts. Listen to this, John 20:21-25. He states, there are also many other things which Jesus did, which, if they should be written, everyone, I suppose that even the word itself could not contain the books that should be written. I think there's a slight. I'll have a look at that. And it spelling mistake or something. But yeah, you'll see that's quite interesting. An exaggeration, a tremendous scribal overestimate, or deeds the historical Jesus did. Yes, obviously, the beloved apostle is clearly stating the length and breadth of Jesus' impact on Judea was profound, more so that a whole library couldn't contain the volumes around them. But correcting for John's hyperbole, the historical record still leaves us nothing contemporaneous or near contemporaneous. Socrates, however, leaves a footprint contrasting quite distinctly from the black hole Jesus leaves us within and decades after his existence. There is, for one, no chasm between his passing and the first reference to him in the historical record. Dr. Carrier writes of the Socrates analogy, and yet Socrates' existence is not in any doubt, nor plausibly doubtable. Why? Because, very much unlike Jesus, we know the names of over a dozen eyewitnesses. The Clouds can be considered the world's first extant comedy of ideas, and it's considered by literary critics to be among the finest examples of the genre. The plays also, however, remains notorious for its caricature of Socrates, and is mentioned in Plato's Apology as a contributor to the philosopher's trial and execution. Who wrote books about Socrates. In some cases, we even know the titles of these books, and a number of paraphrases and quotations from them survive in other sources. And in 2 of those cases, the books even survive. We have the many works of Plato and Xenophon, each of whom was an eyewitness and disciple to Socrates, who each recorded his teachings and reported stories and other information about him. We have nothing at all like this for Jesus. So we see various eyewitnesses speaking of Socrates in or around the philosopher's late life and around the time of his death, and even reporting, obviously, on his death intricately. And you can compare notes. Much noise is made about this giant of philosophy, and rightly so. It's true that Socrates left no writing in his own hand, but we know Socrates was a philosopher-teacher who preferred discourse while walking in nature and in the town square. He lived a life of relative poverty, hardly one characteristic of a man of books, book writing, or the owning of material to put his ideas to paper. As a quick aside, we may recall in previous chapters that even Plato and Alexander were part mythologized and treated as demigods, a trait of the times, or of having left an indelible legacy and a part of the pop psychology regarding these religions, these ancient religions. The virgin birth is attributed indeed, is an attribute, indeed shared by all three figures. The synergy stops there, though. We have also extensive accounts of the trial and death of Socrates written by Plato and Xenophon in his work Phideo, lovingly written, copied and preserved, and whose earliest partial copy is still older than any early gospel we have, dated to around 1 to 200 AD. Going with more reasonable dating, we also have information from hostile sources. The Clouds of Aristophanes, its author, mentioned by Carrier above, a play that derides Socrates and his followers, is contemporaneous to Socrates, and he appeared in its first performance as a spectator. This constitutes tangible evidence. We also have the substantial writings of his beloved friend Plato, who knew Socrates well, and his dialogues with where Socrates plays a central role and expounds on the methods of philosophical discourse Socrates pioneered. This is obvious. So I think I made a slight mistake in the grammar in this paragraph, but sorry for that. It's a work in progress. This is obvious. This is obvious evidence of Socrates' existence, perfectly believable and substantive. We even have a lengthy account of Socrates' trial and execution in the aforementioned Phideo. Sorry about this. We also have the highly revered warrior turned historian Xenophon, a contemporary, giving gushing commentary of this master of philosophy in two of his works, Memorabilia and Apology. Interestingly, giving a different perspective on Socrates' trial and death from Plato's, whereby putting the two accounts together, one can apply a truer, more detailed picture of the philosopher's ideas and motivations. This is evidence upon evidence, specific figures, and still known to us today, these two, Xenophon and Plato, big names and friends of the man, and of disciples of the man, but nothing at all about Jesus, a silence for decades, perhaps 100 years, according to when we choose to date the New Testament material. This is a dud argument, and I wanted to just quickly say, these guys were hagiographied, I think is the word. Is that the word? Made partly into mythological characters with these virgin births, both Plato and Alexander the Great. And we see this was something that often happened. People often talk as Romulus as being potentially someone who existed, and then that was made into a god down the line. I don't even think this happened with Jesus. I mean, it could have been, but I don't think we have enough evidence to suggest that the Jesus in the historical record where he's supposed to exist according to the New Testament really even existed at all. If he did, he was insignificant and no one thought to write anything down about him. But we're going to find in the coming chapters here, coming parts of this video series, that there are actually ample reasons to see that the Jesus figure can be constructed from people around the time, people such as Judas the Galilean, and another Jesus who existed 70 years BC, and of course all of the extant material in the Old Testament, which can be used to forge a Christ character. Isaiah 53 being a perfect account of someone who looks so much like Jesus, but obviously either predates or comes along at roughly the same time, but constitutes Old Testament literature, or apocryphal, literature. And yeah, we're going to hit Alexander the Great very soon, but you'll see obviously Xenophon, just two examples of people who knew and cavorted with the man. Aristophanes, writing about the clouds of Aristophanes, obviously satirizing Socrates, and he was there in the very audience of this play's first showing. Anyway, so have a good one, guys. We're going to be back soon. Take care. Have a nice day. All right. Okay then. Bye.